Hi, friends, and welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast. In this space, we invite you to explore themes of liturgy, faith, the arts, and everything in between, with hosts Hannah, Jackson, Phil, and myself, Maddie. This is our second ever episode. This week, we get to hear and discuss a liturgy written by our very own Hannah. So, listen. We have a goal of keeping these podcasts between 30 and 40 minutes for you, but we are just so excited to talk about liturgy that ending our conversations gets to be a bit difficult. Here's the good news for you. Even though our time is up and our official episodes come to an end, we keep processing and recording, and those extended episodes are available for our patrons over on Patreon. If you like our conversations and wonder what else we have to say, we would love to see you become a part of our Patreon community. To join and find more information, come find us on www.patreon.com/wayfolkarts. We are so glad you're here with us for today's liturgical shenanigan. Let's settle in and join in conversation. Welcome back, or if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to whatever this is. I hated that. Our first couple of introductory episodes are serving just as that, introductory episodes into who we are as individuals and also into what the flow of this podcast is going to be. So if you're joining us for the first time for this episode, we encourage you to go back and listen to the first one so that you get a good flow for all of our introductions.
Such a good flow.
Yeah, we're starting to establish a little bit of a pattern of like we're talking about liturgies, we're talking about each other and kind of getting the hang of doing it on air with all of you.
Yes. And we're really excited you're here, and I am especially excited for all of us because we get to hear from Hannah today. Hannah.
Hello.
Is one of the most beautifully hospitable and peaceful and loving and safe presences I have ever come to know. And I am just really thankful that all of you get to experience her either in a new setting, if you already know her in person, or for the first time today. So, Hannah, is there anything you'd like us to know about what you're bringing us today?
The piece I'm going to share with you today is one that I wrote. And it's actually a prayer that I wrote for myself. So whereas last time Maddie shared with us something, a liturgy someone else wrote that could be used in a personal setting or a congregational setting, mine is a different sort of personal and is more intended to be used in a personal setting and is particular to me. And I have more to say, but we have lots of time, so I'll stick with that for starters. And the one other thing to know is I wrote this prayer when I was in seminary, and I was in the midst of taking Hebrew at the time, so there are some Hebrew words in this prayer. I will do my best to remember to offer a translation of them in the moment. So,
is there anything that listeners should do to ready themselves?
That's a great question. I think as you get ready to hear this, take a deep breath and a deep, long exhale. And even though this prayer is particular to me, perhaps imagine what a prayer of this nature might look like for you, either coming from someone who you feel very loved by or very known by, or imagine what it would be like to write something like this for yourself. Adonai Eloheinu, Lord our God, you have made me and all that I see, and each nephesh, each being that I encounter this day. Today, I remember that you are Lord. Your hand is sovereign upon my life. You are a slow and steady heartbeat. Today, I remember that you have created me to sing, to love words, to love others too deeply, to listen, to want to fill other people's hearts and bellies, to not fear tears or darkness, for that is where you are, to seek beauty, to love the outcast, to call my neighbors by name, to look people in the eye, to use my voice, but to learn to speak your word, to trust you enough to allow myself to be weak, to need the help of others and yourself, to seek the King, to worship, to stand, jaw set, heart soft, arms open, not backing down, to be fierce like my mama, to see your world with eyes of delight like my papa, to be part of your church. May I walk through my days with the weight of your grace upon my shoulders like a shawl, ever ready to place it on the shoulders of another, but never forgetting what it feels like upon my own. Rabba emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. In the name of Christ, amen.
Woof. Whenever you, and Hannah leads us in liturgies a lot, just it's a natural tendency for her. Whenever you read something you've written or something that you've brought to share from another, I never realized how quickly I was moving until you start to speak. And all of a sudden everything beautifully gets slow and I slow down. It's just a gifting of yours. Why this liturgy today?
One of the things I feel particularly passionate about, especially in worship or liturgical settings or just spaces where one could encounter the divine, I feel really passionate about inviting other people into the act of creation. And it is always my hope to create spaces where, like, even though I am an artist and I do love to create, I always want to be inviting other people to do the creation with me. It's not just about me as an artist. It's about all of us finding out who we are individually and together as artists. And so I chose this prayer as the way I wanted to introduce myself to you all. Because it is so particular, and because I wanted to invite all of you into a practice that became very meaningful to me, and that I hope can be meaningful to you as well. I was noticing in my own prayer life that I always pray for, like, when things are wrong, like petition is a thing that I pray for a lot. But in over the course of the last couple of years, I've really fallen in love with the idea of blessing and speaking words of life and truth into people in a way that builds them up or helps them see themselves clearly and fully. And I really wanted to give myself that gift too. And I feel like a lot of times it feels a lot easier to practice that for other people than it does to practice that for myself. And there was also this practice I've been invited into over the last couple of years of saving words that remind you who you are on days when you feel ungrounded or disturbed or sad or forgetful, or you feel like the world is crashing down around you. Saving words, it can be from a variety of different sources, but saving words that ground you, that remind you who you are. So I wanted to give myself that gift of saying, I have all these words that like other people have spoken these really beautiful words into me, but eventually you have to get to the point where you can speak those beautiful words into yourself and believe them. So I chose this prayer today as to sort of take that first step forward, to be vulnerable and show you what it was like for me to practice that, and to hopefully, by the end of all of this, invite you into perhaps doing something similar for yourself.
Yeah, I really liked the section where you list the things that you are called or you were created for, and have definitely experienced you being all those things in my own life.
Well, and that's the part of the liturgy and the prayer that like has a great crossover between the personal goals that you are talking about and the corporate goals. The remembering who you are, but also remembering who we are and who the community is. There's so many things in there that people can find themselves in. And while to us, they all ring very true of the Hannah that we all know. I imagine that reading this in some sort of community setting, it allows so many people to find themselves within this liturgy.
Well, and maybe this is just because I constantly have to find the challenge in something, but also I feel the section about to call my neighbor by name. I think you also say, hold on, I want to get it right because the words are so good. And to listen, to fill other people's hearts, to use my voice. All of those feel like challenges for me, particularly the names, because I don't know people's names and I want to so badly. And I'm actually often too afraid to ask people what their names are, especially if it feels like I should have already known it. But to think of calling someone by their name a calling, it almost gives me this renewed energy of, no, I don't know their name. I can ask and I'm called to ask. Yeah. And hopefully that ask is received well, but I can't control that.
True. Yeah, the story behind that line in particular, my parents taught, my parents were both professors in a theater department at a college until a couple years ago when they retired. And I actually attended school where they taught. And there was one day I was standing by my mom in the theater offices, and there was this one woman in the theater department who is just the, bubbliest person you have ever met, but not in some people are explosive are bubbly in an explosive way, like if you think bubbles in a freshly poured glass of champagne, it's just popping in your face. But then there are other people who are kind of if you imagine a stream that has pebbles in it, and there's those bubbles over the pebbles, so the bubbles are still there, but they're kind of gentle. This woman was like that. She's this gentle, sort of bubbly, and just the friendliest person you will ever meet. And Mom and I noticed that as she greeted each person in the theater office, she always said the person's name. And we both stood there I hardly ever say, "Hello, Maddie. Phil, how are you doing? Jackson, it's so good to see you today." So like feel in our bodies what it was like to have our names spoken along with those greetings. Like, it just adds that extra small but so meaningful element of like, this greeting isn't just because they're passing someone on the sidewalk, it's because they're passing you on the sidewalk and they see you. So and like, this is sort of a different problem, Maddie, but like, I also have a lot of trouble saying people's names when I greet them, but it's more of like I don't know if I have enough energy to interact with you well and fully, so like, I'm gonna save it and like kind of, but it means that like, I cut myself off from like those small interactions that can have so much meaning in a person's day. And to say the invitation in that line to myself is like, you have enough energy to say your neighbor's name and make them feel seen and known in that moment of that particular day.
Well, and it pairs nicely with you say in the very next line to look people in the eye, which is another thing that it's so vulnerable.
Yes, it's so vulnerable
for both people.
Yeah.
And it's a different level of energy that it takes. If I'm going to look you in your eye and greet you by your name, chances are you're going to rightly assume that means I want you to answer whatever question I ask of you honestly and well. Yep. So I best not do that if I don't actually want to engage beyond saying, oh, hey, I noticed that you're passing me. Right. Which, yeah, is a challenge and a beautiful call.
But I'm hearing the bigger fear, maybe, let me know if I'm wrong here, is like, what if I reach out for that intimacy and either it's not wanted or it's like, I don't want to risk intimacy by asking for intimacy. Because like what's your name again? And so I choose to not engage in relationship because I should already have that relationship, so I'm going to choose to not do it. Or the same thing with saying the name or the eye contact. Because it does cost energy and there's no guarantee you'll get it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That vulnerability runs through this whole thing. The lines also to stand, jaw set, heart soft, arms open, not backing down. Those things are the tension of vulnerable but courage. And yeah, so it's just really it's a little like the river of the bubbles that you're talking about. It's this kind of undercurrent of resilient vulnerability is consistent throughout all of the kind of two statements here.
That feels like an oxymoron to me.
Yeah,
and it got me too because
even a paradox.
Right. Well, in the way that I think of vulnerability as dang it, as weak. Like I know. Yeah. And the thing is, like, it's a thing that is a core value of mine, and I still think of it as I'm closer to vulnerability when I'm a pushover or when I give up my strength.
Right.
And so that's actually the most striking line in it for me is the jaw set, heart soft. Those are two different things to me. If my jaw is set, it's because I locked down. Mm-hmm. If I'm open, I think of myself as all soft. But the idea of openness as a thing that you need to be strong or courageous, like we used to resilient vulnerability. Yeah. Or, yeah.
Well, they're exhausting practices. Mm-hmm. At a church I served at, one of the weekly practices on Sunday after leading worship, the worship assistant and the person who preached that Sunday during the last song or hymn, whatever service it was, would go to the back of the church to greet every single person by name with a handshake, looking them in the eye, which one caused a ton of anxiety for me because, of course, everyone knows my name because I am a staff member. If you are not wearing your name tag, if I have not had any sort of pastoral care, meaningful connection with you yet, I don't know your name and probably won't because this was a larger congregation. I would have to sleep so hard just because of that 10-minute span of shaking hands, looking in eyes, and greeting by name. It's exhausting. And I actually think, when I was leading youth group, a big part of the reason why youth group is so exhausting is because you have to be so present to all of their little emotions and bodies and brains and voices and eye contact, and teach them how to make eye contact. And I would always tell my youth, if I ask for your name, it's because I love you so much that I want to know it.
Yeah. That's brave, though.
But else I'm going, hey, you.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do think there's, here's a question. Is there space for self-compassion when parts of this are harder for you? So for instance, one of the reasons I knew I would never be a pastor was because, but, younger. Right. Context was not now. But the pastor I had growing up was, everybody has their different skill sets, but the one that he's just excellent in is he knew everything everyone was going through. Like, there was, the biggest chunk of this service was prayer requests and congregational prayer, and it was, what's the word? Extemporaneous, sort of. And
what does that word mean?
Like off the cuff, like extemporaneous. Like, did you ever do public speaking?
What, like a class?
Like a class.
Yes.
You go get up there and just talk.
Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of
like giving announcements.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, so the prayer was like giving announcements. But there was like 10 minutes before and then like 10 minutes of praying the things that we just did. But someone would say like, could we please pray for my mom down in Detroit? And the pastor would go, oh, yes, Judith went into the hospital on Thursday with this. Wow. And knew it. And I'm like, I don't like people that much. I mean, I do, but not broadly like that. The people I love a lot, and I know everything going on with them, but this is why therapy's better, because I can lean into those people intensely.
Right.
But it's too much for me to hold all that for everybody. And so getting to my question about is there some compassion for that? Because I think about just me and my wife, who like when we might not know, I would be very similar to you, Maddie, about standing in the back and being like, I know this person, I know like enough about them that I can ask them some questions about their story, but like I hope I don't get stuck having to say their name right now because it's not coming to me. Whereas my wife can sit down and like she will memorize the directory and like look at their pictures and know their names, and I can feel badly about myself and that I don't do relationship well. So I don't know. What does that bring up for you all?
Well, I like Hannah, you have the last section. I wonder if was that a purpose for you of the last section?
Say more.
Because you specifically say, may I walk through my days with the weight of your grace on my shoulders like a shawl, ever ready to place it on the shoulders of another, but never forgetting what it feels like upon my own. And it comes right after that long list of all the things you're called to be, we're challenged to be. Yeah. I just wonder if some of the thinking of writing that was, and when I'm not.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so, because I feel like just like my personality is so toward others and not necessarily always toward myself, that like it's often really easy for me to place like a shawl of grace upon someone else's shoulders, but it would be really easy for me to forget, like, you literally just had that on your shoulders. Can you not feel the weight of it anymore? And I'm like, the analogy isn't perfect, right? Because like there is still a shawl of grace upon my shoulders. Yeah. Like it's not gone. But like there's also like it's like simultaneously trying to capture like both that thought of you've been given a gift. You have it in abundance, so continue to give it away. But then also don't give it away so much that like you forget that you still have it too.
Yeah, don't leave yourself out in the cold.
Right.
Make sure you're still wrapped in something warm.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, self-compassion, absolutely. And like, I feel like my growing edge, just like in life, and kind of the growing edge this prayer is sort of trying to nudge me toward, is like, kind of as Jackson said, like how do you be both resilient and brave, and still have like that vulnerability and self-compassion and all of those things at the same time. It's not either or, it has to be both and.
as we're getting towards the end of our time, I wanted to be sure to there's a bit of a 180, or not a 180, maybe a 90 degree. But I would love to hear about what the process of working on this liturgy and including Hebrew in it was like for you, Hannah, as you've kind of studied Hebrew and its own strengths as a language, but sometimes it's an inaccessibility to someone who's approaching it for the first time. What was it like for you to weave Hebrew into this liturgy?
Well, I think when I was writing this, the things that came to mind to write were just the things that were richest in me at the time. So I think now that I've been away from my Hebrew classes for several years now, those phrases wouldn't come to me. They wouldn't be the things immediately there. They're even becoming not as accessible to me. But I was doing a lot of scripture study and translation and singing a lot of Hebrew songs, and there are some words that just felt too rich and that have changed my understanding of things in the world. Like the word nephesh that I use in there. I don't know how to do a brief version of this word, but it's often translated soul. But the dichotomy between body and soul is much more of a later Greek idea. The Hebrew culture is a lot more about the wholeness of a person, and so your nephesh isn't just this sort of ephemeral thing that resides in your body. It's your entire being. So I've started using the word being rather than soul, just as sort of an invitation to myself to see myself as a whole person, or to see the beings around me as whole beings, both physical and whatever that spark of aliveness is in them, and their consciousness and all of the other pieces that make us beings, living beings. And I really wanted to include that word in this prayer because this prayer was sort of this invitation for me to see fullness in the people and the creatures around me. So it felt important to use this word that had sort of changed my vision of the people around me. That's the easiest example I have from there anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Can I sneak in one other question?
Yeah, go for it.
That feels almost unfair, but let's see what you got.
Sure.
You talked about how this came at a process of you feel like it's easy or comes more naturally or culturally, whatever, to offer this kind of thing to others. But learning, eventually you said, we need to learn how to do that for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Wow. So, Jackson asked, what's the process of getting to these words? I'm curious if you could point anyone who sits down and is either I feel like I'm not allowed to do that, it feels super uncomfortable, let me just write this for other people, or isn't that selfish or sinful or whatever. What guidance would you have for someone to start the journey toward being able to offer those words, those names, those blessings to themselves?
Mm-hmm. I think I would start by saying, you are a beloved child of God, and God has called and named and loved you, and God loves the rest of the world too, but God loves you. So you need, in order to fully receive and accept that love, you need to be okay with it. And the thing that sort of got me started was there were all these things that I wanted to be that felt sort of lofty and grand, and I'm never going to live up to these things. And the process of just starting to write them down. Or like, these are the things that, even if I don't always live up to these things, these are the things I hope are true about me. Or these are the things that I know have formed me to want to be these things. Like mentioning my mom and dad in there. And if you start with the things that you long for, maybe you can get to that point of believing that they could be true about you already.
It's like normalizing the practice of talking kind to yourself.
Yeah.
It's a muscle that you need to flex.
Yeah, and it's like, and the other thing is like, it's going to be super uncomfortable at first. If I mean, that maybe isn't true for everyone, but like for me, who I have a lot of growth to do in self-confidence and self-esteem, that is a muscle that I need to intentionally work on in order to fulfill these calls that I believe and hope that I have. But you have to practice. So you have to be okay with it feeling gross at first. Maybe gross is a little bit strong, but
no.
You have to be okay with it being messy and awkward and feeling wrong at first. And if you're worried about it being sinful, find someone who loves you and say, be a sounding board for me. Or like imagine someone else reading these things to you. That was one thing that helped me with a couple of these lines, is like imagining my spouse or my best friends saying these things to me. Like, what does that feel like? Does that feel gross in the same way, or does that feel like a blanket of love and grace?
I do think maybe something important to name for those who are listening, if you are someone who the people around you don't speak words of love or light or encouragement, to the point that the reason when people speak loving words to you feels gross is because it is not your norm. That work just is going to be harder and take longer, and it may mean a therapist speaks as is your sounding board versus the toxic people that you are surrounded by. I mean, I know for me, it has only really been in the last 8 years that I started to get people into my life that made me feel gross because they were too nice to me. And it made me go, oh, this is what feeling good is maybe supposed to be. I'm not supposed to feel good when people call me gross things. So if you're listening and you're like, well, no, my love language is hate. First of all, same. Okay. And it is a toxic part probably of unfortunately the people that surround you. And my prayer would be that changes, or that you are able to see that you deserve better. But Hannah, really fast, because similar to Phil's question, because you wrote this, are there words you have for people who are like, what? You wrote a liturgy. How? And am I allowed to do that?
How is practice, and absolutely you're allowed to. Liturgies and prayers are not just for like worship leaders or pastors. They're for everyone. They're for lay people. They're for people who aren't members at a church. I see them as just part of one's relationship with God. So, and writing happens to be the way that I tend to express myself. So it comes as a natural way for me to engage my relationship with God. It may not be as natural for you. It depends on what sort of creativity you tend toward. But even if it's not a natural one for you, it's well worth playing around with. And liturgies can be playful too. Like, I'm certain that we will get to that at some point. We have a lot of podcasts left to go. Not this episode, but like other episodes.
It's a never-ending podcast.
Yes. So, like, even scripture is playful and has, like, there are so many things. There are so few rules. You could swear in liturgy.
I do.
Maddie does. And I know that I have, but I don't know if they've made it onto the page yet. And like there's so much for you to play with. So if you are wondering if that's a thing that you can or should do, the answer is yes. You just have to be brave and vulnerable enough to try.
Ooh.
And it's okay if you're not there yet.
Also that.
Well, I hope you all get to meet Hannah if you haven't already, because Hannah does embody all the things on the list she beautifully put to words and put on paper in her liturgy today. And Hannah is an amazing soundboard and encourager for people who are learning to see the light and good in themselves. So I don't know. I just hope you all get to engage and be in her presence sometime.
A good way to do that, if you want to, is to comment.
Yes!
Because we're like watching, and we'd love to keep having this sort of conversation with you, and be able to extend the conversation about this liturgy to your lives and to your experiences. And maybe that would be a small way that you get to interact with Hannah, at least from afar.
Come talk to us and tell me what you're writing. And then I can encourage you in what you're writing.
Well, I was going to say, as we're doing this, we're excited to make this more of a community thing where as you do write liturgies or try things, please share it with us. If you want us to share it, tell us, and that might be something that happens. Or if you don't, you just want us to check it out or have a conversation, we want to do that too.
Yeah.
We'd love to engage your liturgies and talk about them and be a sounding board for you in this way. So Hannah's going to close this out by reading for us her offered liturgy once again. So I'd encourage you to get your bodies ready in whatever way you need to get them ready to receive this. Maybe if you didn't pause before listening to it the first time around, do so now. If you're driving, please do that safely, or wait until you're parked and you need to ready yourself to go into your next thing. If you're with others, just check in. Maybe you need to quiet some background noise. And I think Hannah encouraged us to take a deep breath in and out, and just enjoy.
Adonai Eloheinu, Lord our God, you have made me and all that I see and each nephesh, each being that I encounter this day. Today I remember that you are Lord. Your hand is sovereign upon my life. You are a slow and steady heartbeat. Today I remember that you have created me to sing, to love words, to love others too deeply, to listen, to want to fill other people's hearts and bellies, to not fear tears or darkness, for that is where you are, to seek beauty, to love the outcast, to call my neighbors by name, to look people in the eye, to use my voice, but to learn to speak your word, to trust you enough to allow myself to be weak, to need the help of others and yourself, to seek the King, to worship, to stand, jaw set, heart soft, arms open, not backing down, to be fierce like my mama, and to see your world with eyes of delight like my papa, to be part of your church. May I walk through my days with the weight of your grace upon my shoulders like a shawl, ever ready to place it on the shoulders of another, but never forgetting what it feels like upon my own. Rabba emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. In the name of Christ. Amen.
My baby started kicking me as you were reading.
Thanks for listening, Liturgical Shenanigans community. And remember, come check us out over on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Wayfolk Arts to gain access to our extended processing of Hannah's liturgy and so much more. We'll see you 2 weeks from now on Wednesday.